Well, top of the morning to you. This is our Tuesday key market drivers call. It is, I believe, August 1st. The calendar has rolled over. There's our contact info. We'd love to hear from you. Let's go ahead and get into it. Might be a little bit shorter call today than normal because it's one of those markets that's probably the good and the bad of this time of the year. The bad is sometimes the volatility caused by the weather can be a real pain in the butt to deal with. The good news is it's usually pretty easy to figure out what's driving markets, and what's driving markets right now is a much better forecast that Paige is going to tell you about here in just a second. So rain makes grain. Country Western song says rain makes corn, corn makes whiskey, and since this is PG-13, we probably won't get into the rest of it. But at any rate, we have a much, much better weather forecast. And when we came to work here yesterday morning, that's really what the market's reacting to. As always on these slides, we'll show you the price changes from last week. Honestly, markets were mixed up a little bit, down a little bit, but not a whole lot of moves. But it's really yesterday's price action, though. We took prices depending on exactly which commodity you're looking at or which grain you're looking at, grain or oil seeds. Prices were down generally 2.5% to 4.5%, depending on which one you were looking at. And that is nothing but weather, in our opinion. That's mostly what's going on here. So Scott will give you some updates. Matter of fact, we might just start there. We've got nothing bullish from the Russia-Ukraine talks here. Scott, what is the latest on what's going on over there?
Well, there's still plenty of things going on over there, but I don't know that any of those things are actually affecting our markets. Remember, a week ago, we had the bombing of the port of Reni in Ukraine, which is on the Danube River. And everybody was worried that that was going to all of a sudden, well, first of all, it was the first time Russia had bombed anything over on the Danube. Second, they thought that, well, maybe that will now affect shipments out of Ukraine, which obviously it probably does a little bit. But the market, kind of waved that off, by the time we got to Tuesday a week ago, and certainly by Wednesday. Jay and I were talking, Jay was mentioning just before the call started, how quickly we have, after the Black Sea Grain Initiative had expired, we're basically, we ran up, but we're basically back down to where we were for the most part before all of that happened. There's been some other things being talked about. There's a meeting between Putin and Erdogan scheduled for tomorrow. I'm assuming they're going to talk about the same old things they've been talking about. We mentioned a week ago, and they have had it, that Russia had this summit with all these African nations, at which point they said 6 of those nations that are the poorest are going to get some free grain. Those African countries are pleading with Russia to get back into the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Even the Pope has come out now and is pleading with Russia to get back in the Black Sea Grain Initiative. So it's not to say that there isn't things going on, but
I think Putin's Catholic, is he?
That's a good question. Don't know about that. There is some things going on over there, but I don't think any of those are really affecting our grain markets right now. And if there's nothing really going on over there, our markets very quickly get back to looking at weather, like Dave was saying, and so here we are.
Well, it's like I think you'd mentioned earlier that our wheat market here, we are already the most expensive wheat on the planet. So how much more does ours need to go up? Even if it is bullish wheat prices in the world, we are already out in front of those prices. So
by a good bit.
Scott, this reminds me of like when we were younger on the playground, and the bully takes the kickball away from the kids. He's holding it up in the air. And they're all huddled around him saying, please give us our ball back. Please give us our ball back. And he's like, what are you going to give me for it? This kind of reminds me of that. Everybody's begging him, please get back in the Black Sea Grain deal. Unbelievable.
Pretty soon they just give up and go to the swing set, right?
That's right.
I think in other news, we were also talking, we're going to talk a lot about the weather today. We got the bullet on this particular slide that maybe the El Nino is finally getting out of the blocks here, giving us better weather in the Midwest. First off, I'll say that my understanding and my experience with the whole El Nino and typical weather, that it really has got a very poor correlation to Midwest weather. Certainly the heart of the Corn Belt, but there are some meteorologists, like we were talking about before we started recording this morning, that seem to think that the worst is over and here comes the rains and life is going to be good. So I'm always leery of weather forecasts because they're wrong quite a bit. But any rate, that's part of it. We also had the Fed last week, kind of as we thought might be the case. Well, first off, everybody thought they were going to raise interest rates a quarter point, a 1/4%. That's what they did. The signal, this is what we had kind of mentioned. The bulls were hoping that we get the Fed would give us a indication that this is a clear end of the tightening or the loosening cycle, the tightening cycle. The bulls thought they would be more open-ended with it, and that's kind of what happened. The bears, kind of more of a wait-and-see attitude for their September meeting. So the market, as always, waiting for the Fed announcement with bated breath, and then immediately following, nothing happens, and we move on. So, also got the August WASD next week. We'll talk a good bit about what the market's expecting on our call next Tuesday. So, keep it moving here. The corn market, like I said, didn't do a heck of a lot. It was actually down a little bit last week, a little over 1%, but we lost. Corn market, I believe, lost a little over 3% yesterday alone. Again, this is really all weather. It wasn't that many weeks ago when you look at the bullish market factors column on this slide that we had in there that kind of the little smiley face with the guy with his finger in his cheek, like he couldn't think of what the heck to even put over there. We're getting kind of back to that a little bit on the corn market. Outside of, we got a ways to go yet here with the corn crop. Not much of a ways to go, I guess. But if we get the rains, I was going to ask you, if we get the rains that are in this forecast the next 2 weeks,
stick a fork in it.
That's going to say that just about gets us to the finish line on the corn market.
Pretty doggone close. I mean, there's going to be a little bit of fill late.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know what the heck else you could do to it.
Yeah. So, I think at this point, the market is very quickly transitioning from, oh my God, it's going to be hot and dry during the last half of pollination to what are we going to do with all this corn?
Right.
And that's why we've kind of been bearish corn for quite a bit. So we'll see how far down it goes. I don't know, but it does look like the forecast page is going to talk about it's pretty good. So there's your drought slides. With the hot, dry weather, we increased this a little bit. 55% of the corn area was in drought. We still got to remember this. This is still a little bit of a problem. But here's the point that I wanted to make with this slide today. I've been doing this a long time, and I have seen crops that we have come in with a ton of crop topsoil moisture, a ton of subsoil moisture, and that certainly gives the crop something to fall back on. Matter of fact, you've even seen us in these slide decks call this the checking account and the savings account, right? But I've also seen some very nice crops grown with really not a whole lot of moisture reserves, as long as it's like your lawn, right? As long as you're watering it regularly, you don't have to have a lot of deep moisture for that crop to tap into in dry spells. And that's kind of where we've turned off here lately. We've kind of given this crop kind of some regular water here. And so even though we are certainly deficit in a lot of these subsoil moisture in a lot of the US, we've been giving this crop of late the moisture that it needs. And so you got to be a little bit careful just exactly how much stock you put in this particular set of slides. So we've got 84% of the corn crop soaking coming really down the home stretch and just about done with the reproductive phase, the pollination phase. We're going to start filling these kernels out at this point, and looks like we got some moisture to do it. So what about the wheat market, Scott?
Well, yeah, so week over week pricing, you see it was kind of a mixed bag last week, but we've done nothing but go back down. Yesterday was a big red day. We were down, 25 to 40 cents at some points during the trade yesterday. So we already talked a little bit about the Russia-Ukraine business. There's really not much going on over there. When you look at the harvest, we're at 80%, 80 versus 83 on average. We did not make another real big week. I had one report from the Kansas Wheat Commission was talking about it's the first time they can recall in the last couple of decades that we've had a harvest that's taken almost 2 months. But they're finally getting done in Kansas. They're at 95%. So the hard red winter that was up 16. Those hard red winter 6 again. It's Nebraska, North or South Dakota, Colorado deal right now. And really, there's only one state that needs to be harvested on soft red, and that's Michigan. They're at 62. Everything else is pretty much done. You have begun harvest in spring wheat country. That's in South Dakota. That's only about 2% of the total, 5% on average. You're fully headed at this point, and we did have our Wheat Quality Council tour this past week. When you talk about that,
It's a
it
pretty
was
picture you found this week.
yeah, that's a good one. It was from Cope, Colorado. Anyway, the Wheat Quality Council tour, maybe not quite as good as last year, but well above what it was on the 5-year average. They came back with an average yield of 47.5, actually 47.4, which is just a little, again, a little higher than what Uncle Sam said in July, which was at 47 for the state of North Dakota. So there's a lot of hope that crop comes through and finishes well. We'll see. And we've kind of already talked a great deal the last several weeks about winter wheat. Good looking crops from both hard red and soft red. I suppose the one thing to call out on hard red is it's going to be high protein, probably a full 1.5% higher than normal. And we'll have to figure that out. With the millers are going to have to figure that out with blending. To low protein is going to be probably a bit more of a premium than it normally is because we're not
going to have much of it.
We're not going to have as much, and they're going to have to figure out ways to blend soft wheat, etc.
Well, I'm not trying to do a spoiler alert here, but there's moisture for spring wheat country in the 7-day that Paige is going to talk about. Where we're at in the cycle, I guess that'll still help with fill, but I guess that'll still help the crop.
Yeah, there's certainly places that will still benefit from fill, but the stuff in South Dakota and southern North Dakota, you're getting to the spot where it's pretty much done too.
It's pretty much done. Okay. All right, Scott, thank you very much. Soy complex. So you can see a little bit of a mixed bag. Beans up a teeny little bit, oil down a teeny little bit, meal up a little bit more than a teeny bit last week. It was kind of a meal week. But yesterday, like I said, beans didn't do much last week. Soybeans were actually down almost 4.5% yesterday. Bean oil was down almost 4% yesterday. Meal was down about almost 2.5% yesterday. You kind of get the idea here that we have really flipped this market around. And August is still, today's August 1st. It is still in the windshield. We still have a good bit more weather risk in the soy complex than we really do in the corn market or the spring wheat market. Not that those crops are done, but we have a lot of the critical weather is kind of getting to be in the rear view mirror at this point for those crops. Much of the critical weather for the soy complex is still forward, but Paige is going to show you 2 weeks worth of weather that's pretty good, and that's why these markets were retreating. I don't think it's really a whole lot more complicated than that at this particular point in time. And when you get to the veg oil markets, I've said it before, I'll say it again. The palm oil market is following the bean oil market. Now, their day starts before us. They've already traded today, but guess what? Palm oil prices were down pretty good yesterday because soybean oil futures were down pretty good yesterday. So it is a market that, they may come up with their own bullish story here a little bit. There's been a lot of talk of El Nino. One of the very much more consistent weather patterns associated with an El Nino is dryness in Malaysia and Indonesia, where most of the world's palm oil is made. The problem with the bullish story for the palm oil guys at this point is that it's still raining in that part of the world. So we'll see if it turns into a problem later. It's not now, and palm oil is really following. The other point, the main point I wanted to make on this page is this Canadian crop. Canadian crop and either North American crop, it is still dry in Canada. They get a bit of rain here, as Paige showed you a couple of weeks ago. Dried back out a little bit here. We've gotten some rain in some areas, but the Saskatchewan crop, and I put the Saskatchewan on here because that is far and away the largest canola seed producing province in Canada. And that crop has dropped from, I believe, in the low 60s, good to excellent 3 weeks ago, to where we've now got only 35% of the crop good to excellent. We continue to hear from our friends north of the border that the crop is going to be subpar, but it's not going to be the disaster of a couple years ago. But boy, I tell you what, some of the soil moisture slides that Paige will show you here don't look all that great. So,
And we're still thinking 18 and a half.
well,
19 is probably out of the question at this point.
I don't know. With the rain we got a couple weeks ago, I had a couple people say we might still be able to find our way to 19. Now, since it's turned back off dry again, I don't know if that's the case. But again, kind of like the corn market, you know, we got a decent chunk of the weather risk is already in the rear view. So, you know, not that this crop can't benefit from additional rains, but we are kind of coming down the pipe here. And I'll remind you that the canola crop year today is the first day of the canola new crop year. That crop year ends at the end of July. So enough about that. Jay, why don't you tell us what's going on in the dairy markets this week?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Good morning, everyone. Not much of a change. We're seeing week-to-week declines on milk production, which is not unusual. Just looking through some of the numbers, really Class 3 milk has kind of gone up since right after the 4th of July. So we were up 3.3% versus last week. We're still down year over year. You can see on spot cheese, we're up 7%. Really, cheese has been rallying pretty hard here for about the last 3 weeks, just probably due more to demand. And we probably got too cheap, to be honest with you. We're just up 1.5% versus last year. Spot butter has really been range bound, kind of kicked that range up a little bit, up 3.9% versus last week. It's still down 10.4% versus last year. As I had mentioned before, fundamentally, there's nothing that has really changed. This is just, Dave, you were talking about weather for grains. Weather also impacts dairy production, which we know as things get hotter, the cows become less comfortable, produce less milk week over week, which when you've got less milk, which means you've got less cream available, things tighten up, ice cream sales go up, and ice cream sales have been fairly robust this past summer, just with the heat across the United States. So really from a fundamental perspective, really not a lot of different changes there, Dave. If you go to the next slide here, we talk about what the futures markets are doing. Futures markets, as I mentioned too, have rallied here recently within the last 30 days. Anticipating that these markets will probably relax as the weather gets a little bit cooler and seasonally we start to, produce more milk. We're into August now, September, October, we'll get into the fall, milk production will go back up. So again,
we haven't seen the cheese future forward curve look like that in quite a while, have we?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's just some volatilities coming within the cheese market because personally, I think we got a little bit too cheap. Maybe now we're a little bit too on the high side. If you do the calculation versus Class 3, cheese should really probably be around $1.80-ish, and we're, futures are sitting more around 190s. So I think just give this market a little bit of time. I think as the weather impacts the grain markets, the weather impacts the dairy complex too, and I think that's what we're seeing right now.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And I think now we probably, as I've mentioned before this time of the year, we probably ought to start with Paige and the weather, but maybe we'll just go with we saved the best for last. How's that?
That works. Yeah, to Dave's point, a lot of times this time of year when we have kind of a weather market, seems like a little bit of my thunder kind of gets stolen early just because that's kind of the main topic to talk about. But it's a lot easier to kind of see the picture that we're trying to paint with a lot of these weather maps. But this is that past 7-day precipitation map that we always start with. I don't really think a lot of these rains were in that 7-day forecast that we saw late last week. We got a lot better rains than expected. What did we get here the other day between that storm that rolled through and the overnight? Scott, didn't you say you had like 2 inches at your house?
Yeah, I had closer to 220 to 230.
Yeah, so we got some good rains this past week. And you can see we're kind of not the only ones. It looks like part of the Dakotas got some good rains. Minnesota, a lot of those big producing states got some pretty good widespread rains. And that really was not in last week's 7-day forecast. So I think that kind of helped the market go down a little bit. Definitely better than what we were seeing. If you want to pop forward, seems like every weather slide is a piece of why the market, why everything seemed to be red yesterday. We have not seen a forecast like this with those reds and purples in it in, oh gosh, feels like weeks at this point, if not longer than that. So this is the most rain we've had in the forecast for a while now, coupled with a lot of that better rain that we saw the past 7 days. It's kind of shaping up here to be pretty good. And then if you want to flip to the longer term forecast,
That's really nice.
Yeah.
right. So it's kind of better rains the past 7 days, better rains expected the next 7 days, and also better rains and cooler temperatures in the 6 to 10 and the 8 to 14 day. I don't think we've had appealing maps across the board there for a while.
Well,
So
the heat is all gone for the growing region. I mean,
Mhm.
remember a week ago, that was all that dark red color.
Yeah, you know why
Yeah.
it's cooled off? Amber might got their pool done. They
Oh,
just opened their pool like yesterday or the day before yesterday. So it's just time for cool weather now.
yeah.
If I could add something to the U.S. slides, we were talking about the La Nina that we had for 3 years. Now we're transitioning to an El Nino. And there is really not a good correlation to when we have those events to center of the Corn Belt weather. But what is a better correlation is what we have seen in this western edge of the Corn Belt. Certainly hard red winter wheat country, it has certainly affected us, and this dryness in the west. And we've talked in the past about corn and soybean yields nationally. The last 2 crop cycles, we have been clipped because of lower yields in the extreme edge of the western Corn Belt. Maybe western Iowa, certainly here in Nebraska where we're at, kind of that western edge as you're getting closer to the Great Plains. And that's the thing, it bounce back and look at that 7 day. Look where the moisture is. That's where we couldn't buy a damn drink here for a better part of the last 2 years. And so I think maybe that part of it has changed, and we do seem to be getting the rain in the heart of the Corn Belt as well. So at any rate, I didn't mean to steal your thunder, Paige, but
No, you're good. Yeah, so basically all of the US weather maps are looking pretty much ideal here. Like we said, cooler temperatures in the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day. And it looks like above average precipitation for both of those time periods as well. That's gonna help the corn crop kind of fill here a little bit, finish off any of the late stuff, and really, really be beneficial for that soybean crop. Assuming they hold, I guess. This is 14 days into the future, which we are all very aware is subject to change.
yeah.
But at this point, that's what the market's looking at, and it looks pretty great. As far as Canada goes, you can see kind of in that northwest canola growing region, they have gotten tons of rain. But really in kind of that southeast region and Saskatchewan, they're still looking a little bit dry. This is accumulated rainfall for the last week, and they did not get a ton. So it's kind of flip of the coin there. It looks like some areas are doing really, really well, if not flooding, honestly. And then other areas are still looking pretty dry.
Unfortunately, a big chunk of that brown in Saskatchewan, this is Saskatchewan right here in the middle. And the canola region in Canada kind of goes right. I don't know if you could see my cursor there, but that's kind of the canola area. So that's kind of right in the middle of some of the biggest canola ground in Canada. So not good, but again, maybe we got this crop close enough to the finish line to limp home with the rains we got here last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I had on weather.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for listening. As always, there's our contact info. We'd love to hear feedback. We don't necessarily need attaboys, but anything we could do to change this and make it better, we are all ears. And as always, hope you have a good week and be careful out there.